Tonight, before you fall asleep, you'll probably close a door. Maybe lock it. You'll pull a blanket up, turn off a light, and settle into a space that belongs, for these hours, entirely to you. No one else is breathing, no one else's body a few inches away. Just you, alone, in the dark, and you'll barely register how strange that actually is. For nearly the entire history of your species, no one slept like this. Not once. Your ancestors slept in piles. Literally. Bodies pressed against bodies, children tangled between parents, groups of a dozen or more people breathing in the same enclosed space every single night for hundreds of thousands of years. Total physical privacy, the kind you take for granted every time you close your bedroom door, simply did not exist. And yet here's the strange part. Ancient humans still had privacy, just not the kind you're picturing. Anthropologist Carol Worthman, who has spent decades studying sleep across dramatically different cultures, found that communal or co-sleeping arrangements were the overwhelming norm across nearly all traditional and ancestral human societies. In many hunter-gatherer groups still practicing traditional lifestyles today, entire families, sometimes entire bands, sleep together in a single shared space, often on the bare ground or a shared platform, with essentially zero physical separation. Worthman's research suggests this wasn't a hardship people simply endured. It was the expected, comfortable, evolutionarily normal way to sleep. The isolated bedroom you consider standard is, on a species-wide timescale, a wildly recent and unusual invention. So why does the idea of sleeping in a pile of other people's bodies every night sound, to you, deeply uncomfortable? And if there was no physical privacy at all, does that mean ancient humans had no privacy whatsoever? This is where you have to rethink what privacy actually is. Psychologist Erwin Altman, who developed what's now called privacy regulation theory, made an argument that reframes the entire concept. Altman proposed that privacy isn't really about physical solitude at all. It's about controlling access to yourself, your thoughts, your information, and your inner life, regardless of how close other bodies happen to be. By this definition, you can be completely alone in a locked room and have almost no real privacy if your phone is tracking everything you do. And you can be sleeping shoulder to shoulder with 15 other people and still maintain a rich, protected inner privacy if your innermost thoughts, secrets, and personal boundaries remain entirely your own. This single idea rewires the whole question. Ancient humans weren't missing privacy. They were simply practicing a completely different version of it, one built around psychological and social boundaries instead of physical walls. Consider what that actually looked like in practice. Anthropologist James Sussman, who has spent years living among and studying the Jew, Hoansi, a hunter-gatherer people of the Kalahari, documented how groups that share nearly every physical space still maintain clear, deeply respected boundaries around personal matters. Certain conversations happen only between specific people, quietly, away from the group, even without walls to enforce it. Grief, romantic matters, and personal conflict are often processed through subtle, unspoken social rules about who is allowed to know what and who is expected to look away, both literally and figuratively, from things that aren't theirs to witness. Think about what that requires. It requires an entire community to collectively agree, without ever writing it down, that some things simply aren't discussed, some glances aren't held too long, some information travels only as far as it's supposed to. That's not the absence of privacy. That's privacy enforced through something far more sophisticated than a locked door. It's enforced through shared social contract. There's a physical piece to this too, one that's easy to overlook. Even in fully communal sleeping arrangements, subtle spatial rules almost always existed. Married couples positioned near each other but oriented away from the group. Certain individuals sleeping slightly apart during specific life stages. Menstruation, illness, mourning. Children clustered near their specific parents rather than randomly scattered. None of this created true physical isolation, but it created zones. Soft, negotiated, culturally understood zones that functioned as privacy even without a single wall separating anyone. This raises an uncomfortable question about the version of privacy you rely on today. You lock a door and assume that solves the problem, but Altman's framework suggests a locked door was never really the point. The point was always control over who has access to you, your information, your inner life. And by that measure, it's worth asking honestly whether your version of privacy, the one built on physical walls and locked doors, is actually stronger than the one your ancestors built on unspoken social agreement, or whether it just feels stronger because it's more visible. Consider how much of your supposedly private life today happens behind that locked door but is quietly visible to people and systems you'll never meet. Your search history, your location data, conversations you assumed were just between two people sitting in a server somewhere, accessible under the right circumstances to people who were never invited into that space in the first place. Your ancestors, sleeping in a pile of a dozen relatives with zero physical separation, may have had a more rigorously protected inner life than you do behind your locked door, precisely because their privacy depended on trust and mutual respect within a small, known, accountable group, rather than on a wall that, it turns out, was never really as solid as it felt. This doesn't mean ancient life was some privacy utopia. Small, tightly bonded groups have their own costs, less room for true anonymity, more social pressure, fewer places to simply disappear for a while if you needed to. But it does mean the trade wasn't as one-sided as it might first appear. You gained physical solitude. You may have lost some of the social infrastructure that once made privacy something a whole community actively protected together, rather than something you now have to defend alone, behind a door that, in the end, only blocks what other people can see, not what they can access. Tonight, when you close that door and settle into your private, solitary space, you'll be doing something almost no human before the last few centuries would recognize as normal sleep. But you won't necessarily be experiencing more privacy than they did. Just a different kind. One measured in inches of physical distance, instead of the deeper, older kind measured in trust. Tonight, before you fall asleep, you'll probably close a door, and for a moment, in that quiet, solitary space, you might actually be a little less private than the people who, for nearly all of human history, never slept alone at all.